right. So thank you, John, and everyone starting having this server conversation and in the group. So I will try to spend a little bit more time to talk about one of the agendas couple of the company was working toward to have a more standardized a server, right, for enterprise purposes. So we call this more like OCP General Purpose Enterprise Server 2021 workstream, and the anticipation is there's going to be a future workstream that we have to continue to work with. So why GP Enterprise Server 2021? We do believe, right? There's a couple of company was working on this particular stream as we speak. I'm representing Inspur, and we have people from Supermicro and HP. Of course, this is only a small subset of the OEM companies out there in the world. But we do believe in one thing. The OCP community has contributed so many different solutions so far. For instance, Facebook has contributed OpenRack, and Microsoft, of course, contributed Project Olympus. And one of the things we have seen in the past couple of years, many of the company out there in the world was really trying to focus on this innovation on these two particular solutions, and it's really good. However, Inspur, Supermicro, and HP, we still see a lot of members in the community. They want to have a standardized 19-inch product that could be fulfill them the capacity need for the short term, right? Obviously, OpenRack, Project Olympus is ultimate solutions, right? Every data center should go forward toward to in terms of the PUE, in terms of the serviceability, in terms of how everything works. But that's a long-term stretch goal, and many times we see a short-term capacity need, and the hurdle to go through a different architecture is not that straight streamlined for them. So they were asking for something more, a little bit more 19-inch standard. So the goal of this particular enterprise server stream is actually create a common baseline for all the OEMs or OXMs out there, design a product that has a potential, a baseline, meeting most of the customers' need. And of course, as the subgroups and all these different projects become a little bit more mature, we want to add additional must-have, right? For instance, like the DC SCM conversation that we just had earlier. If that become a more standardized, mature specs, we will want to consider that if that should be a baseline for a future hardware design, right? Or a feature that is enhanced for security. So the work stream should be a continued process that have some more inputs and using some of the best practice that we have developed within the OCP groups as a whole. So let me go to the next page real quick. So as a three company, Supermicro and HP and Inspur, we did come out with a little bit what we call a common spec baseline should look like. We do understand every company, OEMs, right, design products in different forms, different form factors, different size, different depth, and things like that. But we do believe eventually we could still able to actually find some common ground. And then as time process, right, as time goes, I would say if we can come up with a spec that define everything a little bit more clearly and for future, I do believe OEMs or XMs can have the capability of truly come up with something so close or so similar in terms of the feature, in terms of form factor. Right now, this is the first time we're trying this process. And then so there's still a lot of major differences, right? But as time goes by, I think we will be able to narrow down to a little bit more specific specs. So I will go over some of the high level ideas, and I want to talk about this is what we have so far in terms of the must have or nice to have, right? Of course, we want to have a motherboard and then to potentially support the max TDP of that, whichever silicon, CPU silicon you choose to have. because the motherboard should be able to use not only in the general enterprise server, the pizza boxes. It could potentially be used in the open rack, in the project Olympus, or any other different projects that among the entire OCP community. And then memory, we want to have the maximum frequency support as a minimum baseline. But of course, like OEMs can choose to design a more memory capacity motherboard if that's a need. And then of course, storage, expansion slots, and networking. We want to have like OCP 3.0 as a standard networking requirement. And base management, we have IPMI 2.0 and Redfish. And we want the community to come back to and telling us, should we always use the latest one of the version of the Redfish, or should we choose something as a baseline? And because that's a requirement. So there's a lot of still in question in terms of the feature. And that's why we want to take this opportunity to listen to the community and then giving us impact, inputs about what requirement is really important. So there's a lot of option specs that we were thinking also in terms of how some of the more a little bit more future looking specs, for instance, the Coldplay or any advanced cooling solution that that we have to support. And then in terms of the management, we have OpenBMC as one of the spec that we feel like it's a must to have in the 2021. But of course, we have considered RUN BMC or DCSCM as one of the stuff that we should consider as well. And then security is one of the things we also take it very seriously as a community. So we want to understand what security features it's what you consider is a must-have, right? And then what features you also think it's nice to have at this point, and then as a baseline, and then some of the feature should be required. And then open system firmware and all other stuff that as a community you can think of, right? So this is a very high level, I'll say a spec to the community so far. And then because it's only 3 companies working on this right now. So if we can collective coming back but with more inputs, that will be definitely helping this to support the end user a little bit better. So let me talk about some of the baseline that is a little bit easier for everyone to understand. And then we want to continue to innovate on top of this, of course, because as a community we want to have some baseline, but the innovation on the pizza boxes shouldn't be stopping here. And I see in the past couple of years I have seen a lot of different companies, right, have such an innovation idea about how a 19-inch can actually do, and then how many stuff you can actually put in there. So the storage baseline, the 3 company does agree to have so far is to make sure one new form factor. You have minimally at least 4 3.5-inch drive tray, hot swappable, and then or you have a flavor of 10 2.5-inch small form factor tray as possible. And then you of course you have the standard 12 3.5 or 24 2.5. But I have to say some of the optional innovation should goes to OEMs if they have a baseline cover, and then of course they want to have their value add. I think that's highly appreciated. So expansion slot baseline, one of the most common requests from my customer is they want to make sure the PCIe design was a little bit more symmetric, right? It normally happens okay in 2U space, but when it comes to 1U, we have seen suppliers or vendors design a PCI slots that's really coming out from either CPU 1 or CPU 0, and then it's not asymmetric for NUMA balancing purposes and things like that. So we want to actually create a baseline saying, okay, you have your OCP 3.0, right? And then should we have at least one minimum PCIe by 16 coming from CPU 0, or should you have another minimum PCIe by 16 coming from CPU 1? So we want to make it a little bit more NUMA balance, and then it's a symmetric design. And then of course we should able to define as a community if you want to, assign a specific PCIe from which CPU if you want your CPU OCP 3.0 slots coming from, right? For instance, like 0 or 1, or it's fine either way. And I think we can decide as a community. All right, of course, Coldplay, there's a lot of sessions during this Open OCP Tech Week. I'm gonna enjoy that a lot. And then, but one of the things is should we put that into a must-have in terms of the general spec, enterprise spec, or that could be an option, right? That's one of the things I want community to feedback. And then, of course, for the management part, should we do Open BMC? Should we do Round BMC? Should we do the DC SCM? There's just so many different options right now. There's not such a, for me at least, minimum. What I think is there's no clear path to find out which direction we should go, right? Of course, there's we have people feel like DC SCM is right, and then of course Round BMC is it contradicting to each other? Not necessary. There's things that I think both Round BMC and DCSCM can come together, and then there's benefit on each side of it, right? And of course, optional security that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and then I think this is just a little glimpse of what could be included, right? This is not necessarily just everything, but I think we want the community to come back and have some inputs. And then open system firmware, of course, we have seen vendors start or users start doing Linux boot, right, from some of their servers, and then that could be one thing we should leaning toward to as a community, saying, hey, if you want to comply as a general purpose enterprise server, you should have Linux boot as a standard. If that's the feeling now our community feels. All right. Yeah, I'm a little bit early on time, but I'll say call for action is we definitely want to have the community to come back and saying, hey, join this conversation, right? This is not perfect, and this is only 3 companies talking about a general spec that should be satisfying most of the end users out there. And then we could say, hey, what is must have right now, and what is nice to have, and then we can actually eventually move some of the nice to have down the road for future must have. And we do have a Slack, a community, and then of course you can join that, and then or you can actually email me to actually including into the conversation for this general purpose server 2021, and then I'll including you with the Supermicro HP representative that we should have all the conversation going. And then the idea is actually have a first draft contributed for the next year main event, and then we're working very hard getting toward to that toward to that goal. So definitely email me or try to contact any of us in this stream, and then hopefully we will have that concluded, and then we can submit that for OCP approval by the next main event. Okay, thank you.
So Alan, I'm going to open the floor up for questions. If I know that we have questions here until about 7:10, and then we're due for a break. But if anyone in the audience here wants to join the question or wants to join the conversation, there should be a click to join button right under. It says click to gain speaker access, and you can click it in, and I'll admit you into the Zoom meeting on the background, and you can ask your questions that way, or you can post them also in the chat. So there are 2 questions that came in, and so Alan, I'm going to address them to you. The first question came in from Robert Quaglia, and he asked, why no EDSFF in the HPC server?
Well, I would say we thought about that, but as you can imagine, for the 3 company, well, sometimes how many EDSFF you have in the system as a baseline, or how do we determine how most of the OEM innovated some of the the tiering of the storage, or how that high performance SSD should work, it's a little bit hard, right? For me, I might say I want to have a 32 EDSFF form factor stuff on my system, but the other company might have a different thought or different on the topology they have, right? So we try not to drill into that much of a specific, right? But if the community feel like that's something we must have, right? Like at least millimeter 2 or something like that, I think that could be a conversation that we can have, right? I'm not rejecting we shouldn't be specific something, but as a community, if we have more than enough people to agree on this, I think we should do that. Yeah.
Okay. There was one more question that came in from Jason Burnett, and he was interested in understanding what video interfaces will be on the servers, VGA, DP.
Okay.
I'm also going to allow him to join our session here, and so he may be able to ask you these questions in person. Jason, are you on? If you are on, please unmute. And you definitely want to mute this live stream so that you can ask your questions and not have an echo.
Okay, I'm muted.
Hey.
You're very, very dim in terms of all. You might want to speak up a little.
I just wondered if there was talk about what kind the local video interface would be, like VGA or DisplayPort, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason. So yeah, that's one of the area we might have missed, right? So, but I would say the three companies should be able to agree, at least right now, like there should be a VGA interface and then USB ports, and minimum 2 of them, right? For your crash car usage. So yeah, like we definitely have VGA and USBs and all these standard IOs in mind, right? We should include that in the future spec. Yes.
Thank you.
Alan, as we move forward in defining this system better, perhaps based on what Joe suggested earlier, a modular approach might be appropriate.
Yeah.
So some of the questions that come in, and it is very difficult for us to answer now, really comes from the fact that there are different choices and different companies and different time horizons. So if we can architect the system in such a way that certain modules are clearly defined, for example, the I/O module could be clearly defined with mechanical, thermal, and electrical envelope.
Yeah.
Different companies or different customers might ask and do different versions of that. Yeah. One can accommodate PCIe, one can accommodate NIC3, one can accommodate EDSFF form factors modularly in the same 1U envelope, as an example.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Yeah, it's a good input.
Jason, did that address your question? You might need to unmute.
Yes, I think so. I mainly was trying to figure out if companies going forward were going to keep doing VGA as the video interface, because I've been hearing it's going away for 10 years now, or 12, but it seems to still be on servers here in 2020.
Yeah, I think on both that question and on the drive question, that's one of the things that we hope to get some clarity on today. And that's why we have such a long discussion topic of, issues like this. Is it something that's important to the community that we need to be prescriptive and say it shall have this type of video port? Or do we be more generic and say it will have a video port and let the companies choose what video port works best or what drive type works best for their server and their implementation? We also want it to be a spec that can go forward into the next generation Intel AMD to allow for next gen processors and next gen drives and that kind of stuff. So we hope to have a really robust discussion on what features do we call out as absolute and it should have this or this type, and what do we say generic is it has this function, and allow everybody to have the freedom to upgrade to the latest generation, or have some flexibility there. So if anybody has any comments there, come be a speaker and join the conversation. Let's hash some of this out.
Yeah, there are two other comments on the Etherpad, John and Alan. There's a suggestion here that the firmware requirements state that the source code must be available on the OCP GitHub. Stating OpenBMC doesn't necessarily assure access to source, so I would prefer the requirement be explicit. They're saying that the features should meet the requirements of the OCP baseline profile and the OCP server profile. Similarly, the code for BIOS should also be available in source form, whether it's in Linux boot or UEFI based. So what are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I think that's a good idea. And then I think that for a narrow point of view, right, my company, I think that will be something, yeah, we will agree upon. Yeah, and we can drive that conversation and say, hey, there's these two, right? Like the BIOS and BMC should be have a source code available on the GitHub. Yeah.
Well, Archana, if I may offer a comment as well. The reason that we have multiple project groups, server project normally handles the hardware aspect of the problem. And as you know, we have hardware management work group and project, and we have security project. We need the complete system before we can design a system and productize it. Also, as everybody knows, we have different levels of contribution. We have specification contribution, we have design contribution, and we have product contribution. So it is clear that at the product level, everything is included as part of the product. But as part of the design or as part of the base specification, we actually encourage people to allow for flexibility of choice for either designers or and customers to select different pieces. So if we combine all of these thoughts together, you might get to an environment that there are multiple options. There's an option for OpenBMC or not. There will be an option for a particular module to be different even in form factors. So if we design these things in a modular way, an example of it is what we're trying to do with DC-SCM. The question about video could be an option that could be part of the DC-SCM population option, for example, or a code option as another example. So the work that will be done at the OCP hardware management work project could define equivalent of a class driver or some standard firmware that will be available on GitHub or equivalent to start with. But of course, people can enhance that. You can have your own code to enhance the feature set if you would like to. So that should be allowed as well.
Yeah, I want to, this is John, I want to add to that comment and think I would like to learn more from Alan that where do we plan to define basically the requirement boundary? Like for example, it can be around the baseball, can be around the, I don't know, part of the system, and leaving the rest to be, I don't know, maybe innovation zone or like the flexibility options like CMX said. Yeah. Can you share more about currently the related three companies, the thoughts on how do you balance with kind of align on certain requirement, but allowing some different implementation to meet broader need? Yeah.
So John, And Simac, I think one of the thing is also when the three company was talking about this, right? So as you can imagine, when we have first sit down and have the Zoom conversation, there's three company who's also think about different approach to the next generation, right? So the way the form factor was so different, the way memory placement and things like that. And for me, one of the biggest challenge as a consumer, right? If I put my shoes in the consumer's perspective, most of the OCP community members are, is when I come to OCP, if I want to say I want to buy a 1U or 2U, right? And then there might be three different flavor. Eventually, there might be like tens of different OEMs out there. But when I have that in mind, I was like, hey, but it become like like going to the shopping center too, right? Like three different flavor and totally three different designs, and the baseline was so different. So it's like, yeah, I see something I like a lot more because of this, and then but it, instead of having a common baseline, the reason I do appreciate Simac saying something about modular, but we do also feel like it has to have some sort of baseline that community see this is something we must to have, right? If I'm going to OCP marketplace, I know minimally this is something I will get. So I do agree a little bit on the open source, the source code portion of it. If I want to combine as a product or design or something like that in the community and then present it as an OCP product, I should have put in an effort as an OEM, right, to have that open source BMC, open source, BIOS, Linux boot as a requirement. I think that's what I'm coming from. I'm more coming from a user consumer side of perspective. I want to come in to the community and saying, hey, I will able to find almost this required feature that I need for my workload, and then I can find three different companies who satisfy that. Right? I don't know if that makes sense, Jar and Simon.
Yeah, thank you for the response. Yeah, I think it's meaningful to start beginning and pick the meaningful basically your definition boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, folks, we had Dimitri also join. Dimitri, did you have a question? You may need to unmute. Dimitri, please unmute and you can ask your question. Okay. Maybe he stepped away. Any other questions? I don't see anything on the chat.
No, I have not got any questions
Please
now.
unmute and you can ask your question. Okay, so Dimitri,
Yes.
Mute the main
Yes,
stream.
but I have not got any questions. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, stepped away. Any other questions? All right, folks, I don't see any other questions coming in through the chat. I don't see any questions coming in through the Etherpad. Oh, there is a comment. They're wondering if this is enabled a circular economy down the road. CE requires sustainable firmware. That was just a comment that someone put in.
Well, Sean, I think, yeah, like I think the reason why we have an open firmware could be, yeah, that could be a use case. Actually, I'm surprised to hear that comment. I think that's a good idea. But I think the initial idea is we have a lot of customer who want to have the source code simply because they want to add some feature on the fly when things happen in their specific requirement, right? Like open BMC wise, if they were, under attack through a potential loophole, right? And then they can, but it only happens to them, so they can cover it out really quick. So I think providing a source code is it's always a thing in open software community. And then, yeah, I think we're just learning that a little bit. Yeah, the way in the OCP, Open Compute project as we speak, right? Because there's some prior restrictions, right, that we cannot do this. But I think as we going forward, we want to have more open source code and things like that in the community.
In general, for systems like this that are striving to serve many customers and many use cases, it does make very much sense for a baseline set of firmware and software to exercise the hardware in a standard way. People need to debug, people need to test out the qualification of different modules. There should be a standard framework to allow that. So, and that could very well be an open firmware where the source code be available as an example for other people to innovate. If we take the modularity in hardware and software and firmware to its logical conclusion, modules in firmware can be replaced with enhancements to enhance security, enhance debuggability, to enhance feature sets. The specification should not eliminate the advantage that we have as a very large community of smart people. As you guys know, specification normally limits what one can do. We need to be careful about that, not to limit too much.
Yeah. Sumac and Alan, two other questions came in. One came in from Phil Picorni, and he's asking, what about USB-C for video?
Yeah. Personally, I think there's that could be an option too, right? But I guess like Simon was saying earlier, like there's gonna be people prefer VGA, the traditional way, and then USB Type-C, different I/O option. So in that regard, maybe we definitely need to think about, can we do it as a modular form factor, right? And then plugging a different needs as a requirement. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other question that came in actually had to do with immersion. There was a question that was, will you be optimizing the server design for immersion as well as air and cold plate?
Mm-hmm. So that's the portion of the events ACS conversation that I left it as more like an open discussion as we speak. We do see a trend as a company, the immersive cooling requirement become more and more. There's more customers definitely looking into it. So we want to gradually including that as part of the must-have, right? And maybe in the future, in order to comply as the spec, you have to have an immersive cooling option. But again, how much do we include that? Once you become a mainstream, I would say that's easier, right, to say. But like if we force that, immersive cooling is a must-have. There might be companies with a very good product that won't be compliant to the specific baseline, right? So we kind of leave that as an option. But as this become a little bit more mainstream, maybe we should consider that as a must-have. I don't know if Simac and Jar has other comments for you.
I give a comment and then let others help. Again, we need to enable optionality. Guidelines should be clear. We have Rack and Power and other work groups and projects as well. We can get help from their specifications, specifically around immersion cooling. Material compatibility is a major factor. So our specification, this particular specification, can state that if you want to do immersion cooling, these are the type of things that are compatible. And then different modules might come from different companies, as long as they all adhere to the same set of compatible material, liquid and all of the physical elements associated with mechanical design, then it is feasible for us to have a system level compatibility.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments regarding that? If not, Steve Roberts is also on the line. Steve, do you have any questions? I'm assuming that's why you joined. And if yes, please unmute. Steve, do you have any questions? Yep, we can hear you if you were talking. Okay, I guess not. And I'm not sure, there's another gentleman that is joining, a Cherny chef. God, I'm butchering names here. And I think people are getting the wrong impression about the click to join button. The click to join button, you join it if you have a question that you would like to ask in person. Otherwise, you can also use your chat screen, or you can also use the Etherpad to type in your questions, and we will absolutely address them. Anybody else for any other questions for Alan, Ja, Siamak, or John? Okay. If there are no more questions, Ja, Siamak, and John, we have about 20 minutes before this session is supposed to be over. We have a couple of choices that we can give our attendees. One choice is we can use this as an open discussion and talk about any other topics that might be of interest. Two is we can allow our attendees to leave this session and they can go join another session that may have started. And number three is we also have meditation and yoga breaks that you can also click into from our lobby. And those are sponsored by Facebook. And so if anyone wants to do that, they can. I believe the free coffee is also available, and people can go into the lobby and get access to those three options. So I'm going to leave it up to you, track chairs, to decide what you would like to do. That would require some unmuting on your part.
I don't have anything specific to discuss with that right now.
Okay.
Let me just offer at least a starting point. Talking about how we operate at Server Project. Maybe that's a good thing for everybody. As John went over at the beginning of the talk, Server Project is formed of several subgroups. There are very active subgroups now. If there is a particular topic of interest, we encourage you to participate. As part of a monthly report out, individual subgroups have regular meetings. They talk about the status and ambitions for their projects. And once in a while, new projects show up that require a subgroup. For example, the topic that Alan covered today deserves a subgroup. So a subgroup will be formed around that. Once we have a subgroup, we have work streams, we have email distribution lists, and that allows organization of those type of topics. So at a high level, we encourage you to participate and make things go better. Now, as these subgroups form, they work towards a specification as a team. And as you guys know, we've had 3 levels of contribution. The base specification, we encourage to be flexible, to allow multiple design interpretations. If designs if they thought for the base specification is in a modular way, as Ja suggested and as Alan was suggesting, then different modules can be changed without changing the entire vision of the base specification to add specific options or values or the type of things that different market segments might like. So as you guys know, in a modular system, it is important for the boundaries to be very clear. Input, output, mechanical envelope, thermal envelope, even software, as we discussed, need to be clearly defined and allow flexibility within those domains. So once a base specification is clear, then different work groups or sub-projects or individual companies can have an interpretation of that base specification into a specific design. It is quite all right for a design, for example, to pick a different component. A base specification might say there shall be a NIC here, but specific NIC could be from any different flavor, or a particular processor, and the processor might be from different flavors. So the design will describe what the details of that is so that other people can design to the same. And at the end, different companies would like to productize these solutions, put them on the marketplace, and everybody benefit from them. In that case, even each design might have multiple renditions, multiple productization points. Well, what I described creates a framework for flexibility. But as Alan suggested, flexibility comes with its complexity as well. So each one of these versions might have a preferred method. You could just say a particular way seems to cover most use cases. 70th percentile of all use cases might be covered if you do these things. So people will definitely benefit from that definition as well. Very similar to the work that Alan was talking about at the beginning. 3 good companies have been going back and forth on the feature set, and they formulated a particular set of features that are mostly covering all use cases. As the questions came, it was obvious that it's not covering all. So a framework will say, this is covering most use cases, but if you want to change a particular area, you may. And that's quite all right.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?